Hello, good morning, and welcome to this webinar on COVID-19 and chronic obstructive lung disease. I'm Sunny Krishnan, and I'm the Regional Health Advisor, COVID-19 for Internews. This webinar today comes on the eve of World COPD Day, which is tomorrow. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, is currently the fourth leading cause of death in the world, but it is projected to be the third leading cause of death by 2020. More than 3 million people died of COPD in 2012, accounting for 6% of deaths globally. COPD represents an important public health challenge, more so in the current COVID-19 pandemic, where those with COPD are at high risk of developing severe COVID. Smoking and long-term exposure to air pollution also play a vital role in COPD, thus further increasing the number of severe COVID-19 cases. In this webinar, we have three eminent panelists. Firstly, Dr. Sundeep Salvi, a renowned pulmonologist from Pune, India, and two environmental journalists who've done extensive on-the-ground reporting on the effects of air pollution on health. They are Jody Gupta from India and Christine Sabilo from the Philippines. Now, a couple of housekeeping rules. Please mute your mics when the panelists are speaking and also turn off your video. And please post all questions in the chat channel found on your dashboard. Now, without much ado, let me pass you on to our co-moderator, Dr. Jaya Sridhar. Dr. Jaya is a pandemic health journalism mentor at Internews. Now, over to you, Dr. Jaya. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Sunny, for that crisp introduction. We have a very little time ahead of us and lots of eminent speakers and a number of participants. And so I'd just like to take the privilege of introducing our esteemed speaker, main leading speaker for the day, Dr. Sundeep Salvi. And pollution, lung health, and COVID-19 are all challenges that have emerged as global interconnected concerns. And that's why we've tried to make this a Pan-Asian seminar. And they are generating a lot of innovative thinking, research, policy, and hopefully action as a result. And Dr. Sundeep Salvi is presently the director of the Pulmocare Research and Foundation, Pulmocare Research and Education Foundation, PURE, at Pune, Maharashtra in India. And he's ranked among the top 1% of respiratory scientists in the world recently in October 2020 by the Stanford University. So we're really privileged to have him here with us to share his thoughts, his experience, and his expertise. Dr. Salvi has more than 200 published papers in peer-reviewed journals and over 17,000 citations. I would encourage all the journalists who are listening to go to Google Scholar if you want any references when you're reporting on air pollution and lung health. That's a good place to go and look up his publications. He also serves on several national and international advisory bodies, not the least of which is the Steering Committee on Air Pollution and Health for the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare here in India. He's also on the International Advisory Board of the Lancet Respiratory Medicine component of the Lancet group of publications. And he's the chair Chronic Respiratory Diseases section for the Global Burden of Diseases study, which the Lancet does periodically. He was earlier the founder director of a very, very famous chest research foundation, also in Pune, India, and that has now been transitioned into the Pure Pulmocare Research and Education Foundation. He's also, I think, probably the only Indian member on the global steering committee that looks at chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is called the Global Initiative for COPD, or GOLD for short. And he's earlier been the vice president of the Indian Chest Society earlier. I just want to flag up 2 or 3 things for the journalists to say that in the long term, moving forward from this webinar, please feel free to get in touch with Pure in Pune, Maharashtra, because they will be working on 4 key areas. One is advocacy for respiratory disease. They're happy to sort of partner with journalists to promote education, information, and public action and policy around improving air pollution and lung health. The second major thing is research into air pollution and lung health. The third thing is they're working with new diagnostic tools for obstructive airways disease, and they're also going to conduct a number of epidemiological research studies, which are going to give us numbers, the numbers that we love, to help us quantify the problem better and to track it over time. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Dr. Salvi now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Jaya, for the lovely introduction. I'm not sure if I deserve such accolades from you, but it's a real pleasure to be present today amidst such a wonderful group of journalists from across different parts of Asia. And I feel very honored and privileged to be here. Thank you, Sani Krishnan, for giving me this opportunity. I hope you all can see the slide. Can somebody just raise a finger and say that, yes, they can see?
It's visible, Dr.
Yes.
So thank you. Once again, wish you all a very good morning and perhaps good afternoon for those of you all from the eastern part of Asia who have just joined in. It's indeed a pleasure to be sharing with you some knowledge that I have earned over the last so many years about this sadly neglected lung disease called COPD, or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. As Mr. Sani Krishnan said, that it is the fourth leading cause of death and is going to be the third leading cause of death in the world very soon. I must say that it has already become the third leading cause of death. The latest report now clearly mentions that COPD has reached the third position quite a few years in advance. And one of the reasons for why this has been achieved before time is the growing burden of COPD and the deaths associated with that in largely two countries. One is India and second is China. India and China together account for around 65% of all the world's COPD population. And India was the country that was predominantly responsible for hastening up the ranking to the third position. COPD is a very neglected disease, as I said, and I thought I would take this opportunity to share with you what is this disease all about, why should we be worried, and how can we create advocacy to ensure that people are listening to this very important disease, which I call as the silent epidemic that has started in many parts of the world, especially in the low and middle income countries of the world. Let me begin by just sharing with you the importance of why we breathe. What is the first thing that we do when we are born? We take the first breath, isn't it? Life starts with the first breath. If you don't take your first breath, you are not yet born. What is the last thing that we do before we die? We take the last breath. Life is a period between the first breath and the last breath. Isn't that important and interesting that life is equated to breathing? If you don't breathe, you're not alive. And there's a good reason for why this is so called. And I thought I'd just share with you some very important facts, the bare necessities of life that keep us fit and well. We believe that food is perhaps the most important one. However, we can remain without food for a few weeks. In fact, quite a few days you can survive without eating anything. And if I ask you how much food you need to eat every day to keep yourself fit and well, and just to keep it very simple, just weigh that in kilograms. It would be more or less right to say that we eat around 1 to 2 kilograms of food every day. That includes breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the snacks in the middle. The second basic necessity of life is water. And on a daily basis, we need to drink around 2 to 3 liters of water to keep ourselves fit and well. We cannot live without water for a few days, unlike food, where you can live without food for a few weeks. The third and perhaps the most important but neglected important factor that keeps us fit and well is air. And many of y'all perhaps may not be knowing this, but on a daily basis, each one of us breathes or needs to breathe around 10,000 liters of air to keep ourselves fit and well. And one of the most important constituents of air that is so vital for our survival is this molecule called oxygen. Now, nature has entrusted this very important task of nourishing the body with oxygen to this beautiful organ called as the lung that is situated in the chest thoracic cage. If you if you happen to see a real lung, maybe a dissection for that matter, it's light pink in color, it's spongy, and it looks quite nice. I mean, you see the lung on the right and the lung on the left, and in between the two lungs is this organ that we call as the heart. So the heart is situated in this spongy, between the two spongy lungs. So it is this lung that nourishes our body with oxygen and gets rid of carbon dioxide. The oxygen that we breathe generates 90% of the body's energy, with only 10% coming from the food that we eat or the water that we drink. That is how vital and important is oxygen for our survival, and therefore we need to breathe in order to nourish our body with oxygen. On a daily basis, as I said, we breathe about 10,000 liters of air. With each breath, you take in about half a liter of air. You breathe anywhere around 12 to 16 times a minute. And if you count all that during the entire day, it would account for around 10,000 liters of air. Out of this 10,000 liters, the lungs soak in around anywhere between 500 to 1,500 liters of oxygen. And then they push this oxygen into the blood to the hemoglobin molecule that is present in the tiny red blood cell. And then through the red blood cells, it is transported to all the other organs of the body where the oxygen is released and the cells utilize this oxygen to generate energy. Not only does the lung nourish us with oxygen, but it also gets rid of a very important waste product called carbon dioxide. And on a daily basis, the human body produces around 350 liters of this waste product that needs to be eliminated. Now, this is how a lung of a patient with COPD looks like. Contrast that with what I showed you in my previous slide. The size looks bigger. It is black in color. If you try to squeeze it, it doesn't feel spongy anymore. It feels a little solid. And you can see the heart between the two lungs seems to have enlarged in size. So this altogether is what we call as COPD, a chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. It is a chronic lung disease that is progressive and is largely caused by long-term inhalation of noxious gases and particles. Obviously, the most important cause of COPD in the world is tobacco smoking, because when we smoke, a lot of these gaseous and particulate matter pollutants enter inside the lung. With each puff that you take, these black carbon particles get deposited in the lung and they never come out. So the lung keeps on tolerating this intense onslaught of black smoke that comes with each puff. However, more recently, we have started appreciating that it is not only tobacco smoking that is responsible for causing this chronic lung disease, but a whole host of other non-smoking causes, predominantly contributed by air pollution, whether it is household air pollution or ambient air pollution. They are perhaps even more important risk factor to cause COPD than tobacco smoking. COPD was a term that was coined around 50 years ago. And it is only about 10 years later that we got to understand that it is caused by tobacco smoking. So it's a fairly new disease, unlike asthma, which is another lung disease, which has been known for almost 5,000 years. but COPD is a relatively new disease, just about 50 years old. Earlier, it was believed that it was only caused by tobacco smoking, and therefore COPD was almost equated to a smoker's lung. It was not until about a decade ago that evidence started being generated that you don't need to be a smoker to have COPD. There are a whole host of other risk factors that are equally important or perhaps even more important in causing COPD than tobacco smoking. I just wanted to share this very beautiful image with you. On the left-hand side is the lung with the windpipe and the branching airways, and the green alveoli. That's the portion of the lung through which oxygen seeps into the blood. If I just invert the lung, it looks like a tree, and I thought this is so fascinating. The lung takes in oxygen and gives out carbon dioxide, whereas the trees take in carbon dioxide and give out oxygen, perfectly made for each other. And I thought that this image is very symbolic of how nature ensures that in order to have survival of the human species, you need to have a lot of trees and plants, because the lung and the trees and plants are just perfectly made for each other. Keep this image at the back of your mind, because I'm going to show you what actually happens in COPD. And here it is. So I have inverted the image of the lung. I have removed all the alveolar portion or the air sacs, and you can see the branching pattern of the airways. So these are what we call as the windpipes. There are such 40,000 such branches that are present in the human lung, that need to divide and ultimately end up into the alveoli. And on the right-hand side, you can see that I have replaced the alveoli with leaves. So each of these alveolus is a leaf, and that's the portion that actually performs the important function of soaking in the oxygen and pushing it into the blood circulation. So a healthy lung is like a healthy tree with adequate number of branches and adequate number of leaves to perform its vital function. I've just again put the tree back into a normal, in the normal position. You can see the branching pattern of the airways, and you can see the alveoli which are put in pink. Now in COPD, this is exactly what happens. And in fact, this is an image that was created by a colleague of mine at the Pure Foundation. And I thought it is such a beautiful image that tells you or simplifies what actually happens in COPD. The branches here, they disappear, they fall off. So the airways disappear. And you can see the number of alveoli, the number of leaves that should be present on the tree. The leaves have become less, and in fact, they have become black in color because of the chronic exposure to these air pollutants. So the right half of this lung over here represents what actually happens in patients with COPD. There is reduced number of the airways or the branches, reduced number of leaves, and therefore there is less amount of oxygen that enters into the blood, and the carbon dioxide that needs to be washed out does not get washed out. So the carbon dioxide starts building up in the blood, and this is exactly what happens in patients with COPD. Now earlier, as I said, tobacco smoking was believed to be the important or the most important risk factor for COPD. But even within tobacco smoking, you have a whole variety of different types of tobacco smoke. You have the cigarettes, you have the bidis, you have the hookahs, and you have the chillums and so on. And in the next slide, I'm going to show you a little bit of a conversion of which one is worse than the other. I have now put non-smoking COPD as on the top portion, because I believe, and this is based on evidence, that this is a more important risk factor for COPD than even tobacco smoking. The non-tobacco smoking COPD can be further classified into exposure to other noxious stimuli. Now, tobacco smoking is exposure to noxious stimuli, but it's a self-inflicted one, whereas here it's not self-inflicted. And then the second component is no exposure to noxious stimuli. So what are the other noxious stimuli that can cause COPD? Household air pollution, ambient air pollution, and occupational exposures. I'll come to this in in a little more detail in the subsequent part of my presentation. The low exposure to noxious stimuli can occur because of poor nutrition during early childhood, recurrent respiratory tract infections, such that the lung gets damaged in when it is in its when it's young, still growing, and when it gets recurrent infections, that damage can leave a lot of residual scar and prevent the lung from growing normally. Poorly treated chronic asthma can get converted into COPD, and very, very common in this part of the world where asthma seems to be very poorly treated. Or those patients who have suffered with tuberculosis in the past, lung tuberculosis, have taken the full treatment, have been declared as cured, but they start manifesting with symptoms of cough and breathlessness. And that is because of the COPD being developed in these scarred portions of the lung following a tubercular infection. So these are all the causes of COPD that we should be aware about. So cigarette smoking is the one that has been established as one of the most important leading causes of COPD. Just wanted to share some interesting facts, especially for this part of the world. A lot of people smoke bidis in India. 70% of people in India smoke bidis compared to 30% who smoke cigarettes. One bidi is equal to 5 cigarettes in terms of the harm that it can produce. Because the COPD is not caused by the nicotine. COPD is caused by the black tar that goes along with the nicotine into the lungs. And the bidi actually produces a lot of tar as compared to the cigarette. Then we have the chillum, which contains a lot more tar than what even the bidi does. So chillum, people who smoke chillum are actually smoking maybe 10, 20 times more the number of cigarettes that they would otherwise have smoked. Hookah smoking, I think, is very interesting, and I must spend a little time over here because hookah smoking is being promoted a lot in many parts of the world. Many people believe that smoke passes through water. All the nasty, dirty portions are filtered off through the water, and the nice, clean smoke enters inside the lung, which is not true at all. In fact, it produces as much amount of harmful pollutants entering inside the lungs as what real smoking does, real cigarette smoking does. In fact, one 35-minute session of hookah smoking produces as much amount of smoke that enters inside your lung that is equivalent to smoking 100 cigarettes. And I think people are not aware about this. They believe that water pipe smoking is cleaner than cigarette smoking. It certainly is not. In fact, it is a lot more harmful. The story about how we discovered the non-smoking risk factors for COPD dates back to around 2005 when we did this study in the slum population near Pune city, where these Anganwadi workers did a house-to-house survey and gathered information based on a questionnaire. Now, two very important observations that came through was that the prevalence of COPD based on the questionnaire was very high. 7.2% was something that we had never expected before, because the earlier reports were around 1 to 2% prevalence. Suddenly, we found that it was 7.2%. But more important, more than 50% of these smokers had never smoked either a bidi or a cigarette or any form of nicotine or any form of tobacco. So that came as a bit of a surprise. And just because we were very curious as to how can you have COPD when you have not smoked? What are the other potential risk factors? And we were able to find that homes that use kerosene fuel for cooking are the ones that had a significantly high risk of developing COPD, 2.5 times more than those who used the cleaner cooking fuel like LPG or the liquefied petroleum gas. In collaboration with the Imperial College, then we did one of the biggest studies in our country using spirometry, which is a gold standard diagnostic test for COPD. 3,500 people randomly selected from across 22 villages. And we were able to show that the prevalence was 5% plus, but 85% of these had never smoked in their life. And the risk factors that we were able to identify was the use of biomass fuel for cooking as one of the important risk factors. So it was this study that actually suggested to us that the cooking fuel that we use at home could be an important risk factor for COPD. I was then invited to write a review for the Lancet in 2009, COPD in non-smokers, and it is now one of the most highly cited papers in the field of respiratory medicine, with more than 1,300 citations so far. In the subsequent year, I wrote this editorial with Professor Peter Barnes from Imperial College, arguing for the fact that it is likely that exposure to biomass smoke from the cooking fuel is a bigger risk factor for COPD than tobacco smoking in the world. And the argument for that was, compared to 1 billion smokers, billion is with a B, there are 3 billion people in the world who use biomass fuel for cooking. And therefore, the population that is exposed or at risk is 3 times more. And if you look at the odds ratio for developing COPD with tobacco smoking or biomass smoke exposure, odds ratios are very similar. And therefore, we were able to argue that perhaps biomass smoke is a bigger risk factor for COPD than tobacco smoking in the world. Subsequently, the Global Burden of Disease report of 2018 seems to have corroborated this finding. This is a beautiful slide that shows you the prevalence of COPD and the risk factors that are associated with it. In this world map, you see countries with different colors. The sky are those countries which have a high socio-demographic index, which are the rich countries of the world. The red are the ones that are the low socio-demographic index countries, which are the poor countries of the world. And then in between these two are the other colors. So India, as you can see, is in green, which is a low middle income country with middle socio-demographic index. Now, what we did subsequently was, after we collected the data from the GBD, we looked at the risk factors associated with these countries. So if you take the high SDI countries, you can see that 72% of the risk of developing COPD in these countries is because of tobacco smoking, and the remaining 28% is because of non-smoking risk factors. As you go to the right, as you go to the poorer countries, you can see that tobacco smoking becomes less and less and less important as a risk factor, but non-smoking risk factors become more and more important. In fact, globally now, 65% of the COPD is attributed to non-smoking risk factors, whereas in a country like India, the Global Burden of Disease report now indicates that up to 80% of COPD in India is because of non-smoking causes. These are the figures from the Global Burden of Disease. I happen to be the chair of the Chronic Respiratory Disease section for the GBD report for India. Out of the 251 estimated million cases of COPD in the world, 55.3 million are in India. And from that perspective, India ranks number 1 in the world in terms of prevalence, number 1 in the world in terms of disability adjusted life years, and number 2 in terms of deaths. And just to take you very quickly through some of these slides, also important to note that COPD causes more deaths than AIDS, TB, malaria, diabetes, all put together. And the reason why I'm sharing this slide is we have a national control program for AIDS. We have a national control program for TB, for malaria, and even for diabetes. Yet we have no national program for COPD, despite this fact that it kills more people than what I've just shown over here. Now, this is the change in the prevalence of COPD from 1990 to 2016. You can see the 2 heat maps, and you can see that over a period of around 25 years, the burden of COPD seems to have increased in most parts of the country. But the portion of the country that is most affected is the northern part of India, where we certainly see a lot more COPD than what we see in the southern states or the eastern states of India. And this is the slide that shows you the how many cases of COPD exist in the world as of now. So this is from 1990 till 2016. Earlier, you can see China was the country that had the most number of cases. Now, India has overtaken China in the year 2015. So we have 55 million cases, the most number of cases of COPD in the world. You can see number 3 is the United States, which is way below, and then the subsequent countries below that. 2, 3 important facts that I really wanted to highlight. India is the leading country. And look at the slope. The slope seems to be going in the upward direction. And if that is what is going to happen in the forthcoming decade, I'm sure we will be seeing a lot more cases of COPD than what we have today. COPD is the second leading cause of deaths and the second leading cause of disability adjusted life years in India. Yet, how many people have even ever heard the word COPD? COPD deaths, you can see China is a little ahead of India. But I really want to showcase a very important observation over here. 2002, 2003. That's the time when the deaths due to COPD started plummeting in China. And I was a little inquisitive as to what did China do something so dramatic that they have had such a big fall in the deaths that are associated with COPD. And do you know what it was? One single policy decision made by the government to replace all the cooking fuels with cleaner cooking fuel. That one single policy decision made by the government, look at the impact that it has created in the deaths due to COPD in China. Our Honorable Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi, has also started a very similar scheme called as Ujjwala Yojana. And I believe that that is also going to have a significant impact on the death rates due to COPD. But this simple single policy decisions can have such a big impact. Disability adjusted life years, there's no challenge for India at all. I think we are right on the top. Now, this is an old slide that talks about the economic loss due to this one disease called COPD in India. 2016, the estimated economic loss was around 45,000 crore rupees. That's around $6.7 billion. There are two bars over here. You can see the orange is the amount of money that the country is losing. And the purple bar is the amount of money that the country would have lost had we been good in diagnosing and managing our patients of COPD better. But that's a huge gap, isn't it? It just tells us two important things. We are not doing a good job when it comes to COPD management in terms of economic loss. And the economic costs that this one disease is costing us is huge. This is a study that was done in 2005. We have just completed a big study. This was done at the Chest Research Foundation before it shut down, looking at the economic loss due to COPD. And the data is still currently being analyzed. But the preliminary results suggest that in 2020, it is not 45,000 crore rupees, it is about 100,000 crore rupees, which is the economic loss that is caused by one disease called COPD. That's around 13 billion American dollars for our country. Now, this is way above the budget of the health ministry of our country. How that one disease can cause you such a huge economic loss. Now, this is a very interesting slide that came from the Global Burden of Disease report. Disability adjusted life years adjusted for the population for the different states in India. So the further you go to the right, bigger is the suffering and death that is associated with COPD in that particular state. So you can see Uttar Pradesh is the state that has the highest number of disability adjusted life years attributed to COPD, then West Bengal, Bihar, Uttarakhand, and so on. But within this horizontal line, there are four different colors. And these four different colors represent the four different risk factors that are attributed to COPD. You have the ambient air pollution, the first one. Then you have the household air pollution in yellow, tobacco smoking in dark blue or black, and then occupational in pink. Very important messages that come over here. Say, for example, if you take Madhya Pradesh or if you take Punjab, look at the contribution by tobacco smoking, very small. Major contribution in Punjab is ambient air pollution, then household air pollution, and then occupational exposures. Whereas if you take Mizoram, look at the contribution by tobacco smoking, because smoking is very highly prevalent in Mizoram. So smoking then becomes a bigger risk factor for COPD in Mizoram, whereas ambient air pollution and household air pollution are of lesser importance. This is the first time ever that we have such a kind of a figure for the different states of India. Every state is different, and therefore every state, when they have to decide their policy decisions or undertake the policy decisions, I think they should look at this data and then generate the policies. But by and large, if you look at household air pollution and ambient air pollution, oh, they're a big leading cause of COPD in our country. So just to quickly show you the images. So biomass fuel for cooking, 750 million people exposed to that. Tobacco smoking, 120 million smokers in India. Ambient air pollution from motor vehicles, industries, occupational exposures, road sweeping, building and construction dust, mosquito coil exposure. One mosquito coil in the night produces as much amount of smoke that is equivalent to smoking 100 cigarettes. One dhoop stick is equivalent to 500 cigarettes. One dhoop stick with just 4 centimeters burns for 15 minutes only and produces as much amount of smoke as that caused by equivalent to 500 cigarettes. Then you have burning of incense, then pesticides, people who have suffered with lung tuberculosis in the past, poorly treated chronic persistent asthma, and certain occupations like priests or temple pujaris who are chronically exposed to the fire and the fumes associated with that. And these are just some of the other new occupational causes of COPD that have just been published. So if you're a sculptor or a painter or an engraver, or you're a gardener, park keeper, groundsman, warehouse, fishing, sports people, or you are a plastic molder, these are important occupations that are associated with COPD, just been published very recently. So the symptoms that are associated with COPD are primarily breathlessness, cough, chest tightness, and a wheeze, which is a musical sound that comes from the chest. How do you diagnose hypertension? Obviously by a test called sphygmomanometer or a BP apparatus. How do you diagnose a heart disease, ischemic heart disease? Electrocardiogram. How do you diagnose diabetes? Using a glucometer. How do you diagnose COPD? How many of you all know the answer? I'm sure many of you all don't even know what is the tool that is used to diagnose COPD. It is called as a spirometer, very grossly underutilized in most parts of the world, certain area, and therefore a lot of underdiagnosis of COPD occurs because doctors do not use spirometry. It's a test that is not easily available. Many doctors don't even know how to interpret the test. Just to show you the portion of the lung that is affected in COPD. So this is the branching network of the airways, the branching fibers. A, B, and C are the three portions that I've shown you. Asthma is a disease that largely affects A, B, and C in equal proportions. COPD is a disease that largely affects predominantly the C portion of the lung, which is the terminal portion of the lung, the smaller portion of the lung, where there are small airways and where the leaves are present. So that's the portion of the lung that is largely affected in COPD. Not only is the lung affected in COPD, but a lot of other organs are also affected. And I showed you how the heart becomes big in patients with COPD. Other than that, you have depression, you have skeletal muscle weakness, a lot of muscle loss occurs in these patients. They become very thin, the bones become weak, they develop osteoporosis, and this is all a composite that occurs because of the damage and the destruction that occurs in the lung portion that is responsible for causing a whole host of other systemic diseases that we call as comorbid conditions. Now, just to highlight some very important treatment aspects, like vaccination is very important for children as soon as they're born. It is important to appreciate that COPD vaccination is very crucial, something that has not caught up or has not got the recognition that it deserves. The flu vaccine, for that matter, has to be given every year to a patient of COPD. Largely, it is not. And just to show you the scale of the issue, in Japan, it is a law to give the flu vaccine in every patient of COPD. If the doctor forgets to give the flu vaccine, the doctor can go to jail. That's how important it is in Japan. In other countries also, people have started appreciating the importance of the flu vaccine because it reduces the risk of them developing these exacerbations. Then the pneumococcal vaccine, and very recently, just about the latest guidelines of GOLD have now suggested that the triple, the whooping cough, diphtheria, tetanus vaccine should also be given to the patients of COPD. Now, this is something that I would like the journalists to take forward, because adult vaccination is a badly neglected part of the health, in the public health policy space, and especially in people with chronic lung disease such as COPD, it's important to make sure that they're vaccinated. Something that needs to be taken to the masses. One of my PhD students just completed a study that looked at the awareness of COPD in the community. So 3,000 people in the urban slums of Pune city, 3,000 people in the rural areas surrounding the Pune city. And a very simple question that she asked was, have you heard the word COPD? And do you know what the answer was? Less than 1% of the population had ever heard the word COPD, a disease that is the second leading cause of death in India, a disease that is known to be preventable, yet many people have not even heard this name before. Now, you can't blame the English name for this because AIDS is also an English word, but look at the level of awareness that has been created for AIDS. That is because of the tremendous amount of drive and passion by the World Health Organization, by the state and the central government healthcare bodies to make that word known to people. AIDS, even if it's an English word, 99.9% of the people may not even know the full form of the word of AIDS, but they know that there is something called AIDS. And I think that is the level of awareness that we need to create today for this lung disease called COPD. People may not know what is the full form, but it is important to appreciate this because this is a preventable disease. One of the last slides, just to share with you an editorial that I wrote a few years ago, arguing for the fact that India needs a national COPD prevention and control program. It's a need of the hour. Maybe in other countries surrounding India as well, there is a need to have a national program for that. Just a couple of slides related to COVID and COPD. We know that the coronavirus enters into the human host or the human cell through the angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptor. These receptors are present in the oral cavity and tongue, but they're also present in large numbers in the lung parenchyma, in the alveoli or the leaf portion of the lung. And that is the reason why that portion of the lung gets infected. That's why we get COVID pneumonias. Now, what is interesting is patients of COPD have a greater expression of the receptor that is responsible for the coronavirus infection. The ACE2 receptors are in greater proportions in the lung of patients of COPD. In fact, even smoking has been shown to increase the numbers of these receptors and therefore make you more vulnerable to catch the infection. So if you're a smoker, if you suffer with COPD, you are a lot more likely to develop the COVID-19 infection than somebody who does not smoke, purely because you've got more number of receptors that the virus can attack. Very recent paper, what is the risk of COPD, catching COVID-19 in patients of COPD? 5.6 times more than somebody who does not have COPD. So that's the risk of catching the infection in patients of COPD. And this is again a recent study that showed that meta-analysis of 22 studies, more than 11,000 patients of COPD. If you have COPD, the risk of you dying from the COVID complications is significantly higher. Although hypertension and diabetes are a lot more common in patients as comorbid conditions in patients of COVID-19, but if you have associated COPD, the death rates are much more higher. And just one last slide, just to share with you, what should patients be aware of? Patients of COPD must follow the basic infection control measures. They must wear a mask at all times. Now, here is a difference. Patients of COPD must not wear the N95 tight-fitting mask because it is very difficult to breathe. There are studies that have shown that it causes more harm than benefit to these patients of COPD. So N95 is a no for patients of COPD. A simple surgical mask or a cloth mask is good enough for them. The second important thing is consider shielding or sheltering in places. What does it mean? It almost means a lockdown, a semi-lockdown for all patients suffering with COPD. The reason why I said is they're at a greater risk of developing COPD, they're more vulnerable, and therefore they should not be going outside and getting themselves exposed. they should shelter themselves, they should shield themselves, isolate themselves, lock them, have lock down themselves if they want to protect themselves from catching the COVID-19 infection. It's very important. Make sure that they have adequate medications. Because of these lockdowns, a lot of these COPD patients did not get the medication, and therefore many patients suffered and had exacerbations. So ensure that there's an adequate supply of medicines during this COVID pandemic. The vaccination should continue, physical exercise should continue within the limits that are permissible to these patients. So I'm going to stop over here. I hope you all found this presentation useful. COPD is indeed an important disease that is badly neglected, and it is important for people like you to start sending out the message and creating awareness amongst the important stakeholders so that appropriate policy decisions can be taken by the relevant countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salvi, for that absolutely wonderful presentation as usual. And I just would like to channel a question from Dr. Reena Mukherjee, who's a public health practitioner as well as an independent journalist. And she's been reporting on public health for a long time. Could you explain on the risks of developing COPD among children who have problems such as eosinophilia and bronchospasm?
Okay, so COPD is a disease predominantly of the adults. Children do not develop COPD for a simple reason. You need to have minimum of 15 to 20 years of exposure to the insulting substances for you to develop COPD. Remember that the lung is a very tolerant organ. It can cope up with a lot of nuisance. You start smoking. It's only after 20, 30 years of smoking that your lungs start manifesting with symptoms. That's because they're big tolerators of nonsense. So it takes a long time. It takes a long time to develop COPD. And that's a simple reason why children will not develop COPD. They will develop other lung diseases, and the most common one of them is asthma. So until the age of 20, it's asthma. I mean, that's a disease of the airways. And in the Western world, COPD occurs after the age of 40 because you need to have 20 years of smoking to develop COPD. But in our country, we have seen COPD at a much younger age of around 30, and especially in women and girls who have been cooking using biomass fuel since their childhood. So we have seen a lot of young COPDs, but that's at the age of around 30, not before that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Salvi. I'm just going to pass this on to Sunny now, who's going to take on more questions from here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jaya. The two other questions addressed to Dr. Salvi will be answered towards the end of the webinar. Right now, I'd like to introduce you to Christine Sabilo, who will be talking about the on-the-ground situation of air pollution and its effect on health, especially lung health in the Philippines. Just a brief background on Christine. Christine is a multimedia reporter for ABS-CBN, the leading news organization in the Philippines. She reports on health, science, and environmental issues for the network's online platforms and global cable news channel. She was formerly chief of reporters for Inquirer.net, a top news website in the country. And throughout her journalistic career, she's covered the office of the president, the aftermath of Super Typhoon Haiyan, and various international events, such as the 2015 climate negotiations in Paris. So over to you, Christine. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Let me just share my screen. So thank you for Internews and Earth Journalism Network for inviting me to speak at this webinar. I was asked to talk about my reporting experience on air pollution, respiratory diseases, and COVID-19. So, as mentioned, I really started with political reporting, moved to environmental reporting, and now I'm one of the main reporters following the COVID-19 pandemic issues here in the Philippines. So, let me start with my outline. I'll start with the situation of the air pollution in the Philippines. It's particular to our country, but I know that it's probably similar to the situation in our neighboring countries in Asia. And the effects of air pollution on health, Dr. Salvi already discussed the technical or the scientific aspects of COPD and COVID-19. So I'll just mention it as risk factors. And finally, based on my stories and interviews with stakeholders, what are the possible ways to address air pollution in countries like the Philippines? So first, I wanted to share with you this photo or Facebook post that went viral in the Philippines back in March. So if you don't know, the Philippines was under strict lockdown in the middle of March, March 16, after it detected community widespread of the COVID-19 disease. And this image particularly became viral because it was the first time that the Filipinos in Metro Manila, the capital city and the surrounding cities of the Philippines, saw the Sierra Madre mountain range from the city. And no one really realized that it could be seen from the metropolis because of the very thick fog or smog actually in the city that became, part of the normal everyday life of Filipinos here. So that one got up to 30,000 shares, and it was widely covered by media. More of like a good news story with the pandemic. But I started looking, even before that, I was already covering air pollution and monitoring the PM 2.5 levels in the Philippines. So I wanted to tell a different story as well because I think in other parts of the world as well, there were a lot of stories about how the lockdown was able to, give Earth a rest. It was able to bring down pollution in many countries, not just the Philippines, but also in China. But the question is that really a good thing? Or what are the more important things that we should be looking at in terms of COVID and the environment? And so PM 2.5, or its particulate matter that's less than 2.5 micrometers, these tiny particles reach the lungs. And based on my research and my interviews with specialists, it's linked to cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. So it's one of the risk factors, living in a city with very high air pollution. For a lot of diseases, including lung cancer. And basically, it just showed that just a week after Metro Manila in the Philippines was locked down, PM 2.5 levels went down by a lot in different parts of the area where there were actually machines measuring PM 2.5 levels. And the one on the right is what they call the aerosol optical depth. So this is taken using satellite imagery. And it's basically how sunlight is reflected by dust, particles, and air pollution. And you can see that before the ECQ, or we call it the Enhanced Community Quarantine in the Philippines, this is the strictest level of quarantine where basically if you don't have essential business outside, you should not be going out. It shows that its pollution was very high in Metro Manila, especially you see the red dot there. And weeks after the quarantine or the lockdown, it went down by a lot. There, you could still see a bit of yellow in the other parts, but that's because of biomass burning or agricultural burning, which I will mention later on. So I interviewed a couple of scientists. One of them is Professor Jerry Bagtas. Sorry about the typo. He's an atmospheric physicist. And when we started talking about this, about the many reports, around the world talking about the lower level of air pollution in the Philippines, in their different countries because of the lockdowns. He said, there's nothing to be happy about it because while we were able to reduce the pollution now, it's just an unintended consequence. It wasn't really a direct action to reduce air pollution. At the same time, he pointed out that the air pollution that we've emitted in the past years, it stays in the atmosphere for a very long time. And reducing it for a couple of months is not really a solution for climate change and the other effects it has on the health of the people and on the environment. So I just wanted to share with you the product of my interviews and my research on this. This was supported by Internews and Earth Journalism Network. It was an article, but we also had a video. So this is a 4-minute video of the summary of my report. This is the Metro Manila skyline before the COVID-19 pandemic. This is Metro Manila now. No smog and clear skies. You can even see the Sierra Madre mountain range looming over its skyline. People have been staying at home since March 15 because of the government-mandated lockdown. So that means there's less people on the streets, less cars on the road, and less pollution.
Ang estimated na contribution ng automobile sa pollution ng Metro Manila is around 60 to 80%.
Air pollution is a leading contributor to around 7 million premature deaths per year. Most of its victims are from less developed countries.
But Filipinos are breathing unhealthy and dangerous air all year round. That's according to a study on the world's most polluted countries in 2019 by Swiss-based company IQ Air. In a 2018 report, Greenpeace said that 11,000 to 27,000 Filipinos suffered premature deaths because of the air pollution-related diseases. The causes of death range from lung cancer, cardiovascular diseases, and respiratory diseases. All of these can be traced to exposure to fine particulate matter, or PM2.5, from fossil fuels. What exactly is PM2.5? PM2.5 are fine air pollutants invisible to the naked eye. Exposure to PM2.5 can cause heart and lung problems. And in more extreme cases, it can even cause death.
The International Agency for Research on Cancer considers PM2.5 to be a major cause of lung cancer worldwide. Napakaliit kasi nito. Yung PM2.5 nakakalagpas siya sa nose hairs hanggang makapasok sa hingahan natin.
In April, the level of PM2.5 in Metro Manila decreased compared to air quality data taken in January. That's according to the airtoday.ph monitoring station in Quezon City in the northern part of Metro Manila. Experts say the improvement in air quality is directly the product of the 6-week-long lockdown. This simulation based on images from the Himawari satellite shows the improvement of air quality in Luzon. But according to experts, the lockdown in Luzon and in other parts of the country didn't exactly solve our air pollution problems.
Kung ano yung nakikita natin visually here, it's just an illusion, a glimpse of what a better society that we can have. What's happening right now, it's just like an engine. It's like an old engine. Pag pinatay mo siya, so sa ngayon, wala siyang usok. But eventually, when everything goes back, when you turn on the engine again, you're still using the same dirty old engine that will still pollute the air.
It's because car emissions aren't the sole source of pollutants contaminating the environment.
One of which ay yung burning. So, agricultural burning. Community maritime pa lang, it looks like there's more burning in parts of central Luzon and the Cagayan Valley.
Farmers intentionally set crop stubbles on fire to prepare for the next planting season. Filipinos have been practicing this for decades. All of this adds to the worsening problem of air pollution in the Philippines. So while everyone talks about the new normal as people around the world adjust to the COVID-19 pandemic, experts say countries should also be taking the opportunity to promote more environment-friendly practices.
Ano yung mga steps talaga to reduce the emission? Siguro kung sa city pinag-uusapan natin na NCR, then it really should be yung mga efficient na mass transport. Kasi we can really see na you reduce the number of cars, you reduce pollutant concentration. Hopefully, makita ng tao yung with very good air quality today na maisip natin somehow na importante ito.
So hopefully the corona experience will be a wake-up call for us to take that action now. We have to do the best for the health of our country, the health of the planet, the health of the people. This goes back to personal responsibility. We need to reconnect with nature.
As temporary as the sites may be, it's a promise of a better future if we act now.
Okay, so the Tagalog or Filipino version of that video received more than 800,000 views on Facebook alone. So, even besides our report, the issue of air pollution really got a lot of traction or discussion at the start of the COVID pandemic. Unfortunately, now it's a question of whether the government and stakeholders would take more serious action on it. So just a brief overview of air pollution in the Philippines. This was shared in the report already. In the Philippines, according to the WHO, there are 45.3 air pollution-related deaths for every 100,000 people in the Philippines. And that's the third highest in the world. And of course, there are also computations of air pollution-related premature deaths, and the fact that the Philippines is one of the most polluted countries in the world, especially Metro Manila, the city center of the country. So it's important to note that while for Metro Manila, majority of the air pollution comes from vehicle pollution, you should also know that the Metro Manila does not have a good mass transportation system. That's why a lot of people, especially the middle class and upper classes, ended up, using private vehicles, and that contributes to a lot of traffic and a lot of air pollution. One of the interesting things that the scientists I talked to monitored during the pandemic is that number one, there was biomass burning from the Indochina region as well. So it just goes to show that air pollution is not just a per country issue, but it's a global problem that has to be tackled together by different nations. At the same time, as Dr. Bagdasa mentioned in the video, he also monitored an increase in agricultural burning outside Metro Manila. So there is still a lot of air pollution in the region, in the area of Luzon in the Philippines, because we cut down the vehicles, but there is still biomass burning in other parts of the country. So Dr. Salvi already mentioned how air pollution and other irritants are affecting COPD and COVID patients. And there's also an economic cost, as Dr. Salvi mentioned. It's huge as well for a country like the Philippines, and it contributes to climate change. So as mentioned, the COVID pandemic is basically the biggest story of the year and maybe the century, because of how dramatic the illness is. I've been following it since January, but really air pollution is a big story as well that not a lot of people are covering and paying attention to, because as mentioned by Dr. Salvi, it's a silent killer. A lot of people are actually dying because of the effects of air pollution. In the Philippines, COPD and its allied diseases are actually the 7th leading cause of death. But I think this might be underreported. Number one, we don't have updated data. So this is based on the 2013 data of the Philippine government. At the same time, the Philippine College of Chest Physicians note that there is a lot of underreported cases of COPD in the Philippines. They're saying that 1 in 5 Filipinos have COPD, but only 3% of them actually consult a doctor, and 50% are not aware of the disease. So we don't really know how large the problem is in countries like the Philippines. Another problem is the fact that we only have around 800 COPD specialists in the Philippines. So it's very, we don't have enough specialists diagnosing this illness and taking care of those who are suffering from this. Interesting that Dr. Salvi mentioned as well that biomass burning is a very large risk factor for COPD. This is something that might not be, because I focus on Metro Manila since that is where I am. But there are also studies in the Philippines that show a large cases of COPD in rural areas because of the same problem. So as mentioned, both COVID and COPD have air pollution as risk factors. And of course, if you have COPD, you're at higher risk for a severe illness of COVID. So all of that is linked, and it just goes back to air pollution, smoking, and other causes of these illnesses. There was also a previous study that came out during the pandemic. This is from the United States, and it basically compares, it links the air pollution in different counties in the United States, and it shows that if you look at the counties with higher levels of nitrogen dioxide, it's actually correlated. There's association with COVID fatalities. So more studies should be done on this, but it's an interesting insight on how air pollution could be affecting populations when it comes to their risk to COVID. So the Philippines, at least as of last week, was the 26th country with the most number of COVID cases. Today, I think we're going to hit 410,000 cases. That's cumulative. But our deaths are lower, probably because we have a younger population compared to Western countries. And at the same time, there are concerns of underreporting as well because a lot of different issues, especially pertaining to our health sector. So in the Philippines, there are almost 8,000 deaths due to COVID. But on top of that is 45,300 yearly deaths because of air pollution related diseases. So that just goes to show, that while we're very focused on trying to, find a vaccine, a cure for COVID, we could also be saving a lot of lives by addressing the problem of air pollution. One of the people I interviewed is an environmental consultant, and he was pointing out that we have taken this drastic action to protect us from being infected with coronavirus. But the action now is, why can't we take drastic action as well to prevent the deaths of so many people dying from air pollution? So just a rundown, what are the different ways that we can address air pollution in the Philippines, as mentioned, as tackled by the specialists I interviewed. Number one, of course, is addressing fossil fuel. So looking into renewable energy, electric vehicles and bicycles, higher emission standards. They're saying, going Euro 4, Euro 6 for our country, improving mass transportation. As you saw in the video, we have a very large population, working population, who have to commute. And some of them have opted to use private transportation because of the very bad mass transportation system in Metro Manila. So this must be addressed to lower the use of private cars as well. And of course, the enforcement of clean air laws. Biomass burning is actually not allowed under Philippine laws, but no one is enforcing it, and it's still widespread, especially in rural areas. And finally, telecommuting. It's very interesting because the pandemic gave us a glimpse of what can happen if we're able to lower the air pollution levels in our countries. At the same time, it's an opportunity for us to take on environment-friendly practices, such as using more bicycles, having bike lanes. A lot of people were forced to do that in Metro Manila because transportation had to be shut down. A large part of the public transportation was shut down to curb the mobility of people, and a lot of people ended up working from home. And people are realizing it's possible, we can actually do that. And it's a question now of, will we continue to do that after the lockdown is lifted in the Philippines and other parts of the world? So it's a very big opportunity for us now. We're suffering a lot of deaths and illnesses because of COVID, but at the same time, it gives us leeway to address air pollution as well. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you. That's my Twitter handle, Christine Sabilio. If you have questions we're not able to address for this webinar, you can tag me as well on Twitter and ask me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. Christine? Yeah, cheers. Yeah, we've got one question for Christine, which we will answer after Joydeep has spoken. And also, I think there are three remaining questions for Dr. Salvi. So we'll address them after Joydeep has spoken. Now, let me introduce you to Joydeep Gupta. Joydeep Gupta is an Indian journalist who's been writing on environmental issues since covering the Bhopal disaster in 1984. For his contributions to environmental journalism, he won the 2012 Green Globe Award at the Delhi Sustainable Development Summit. Joydeep is also director of the Third Pole, an Indian climate dialogue run jointly by China Dialogue and the Internews Earth Journalism Network, whom we have Amy Smith as one of the attendees today. Amy is the one of the coordinators of this Earth Journalism Network in the Internews family. So without much ado, Joydeep, it's all yours now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunny. I can see that we are an hour and a quarter into this workshop. So I'm not going to talk much because a lot of what I had planned to say has definitely been covered by both Dr. Salvi and Christine very well. So I would much rather have more discussion on what we as journalists can actually do to improve the situation beyond what we are doing right now. But let me just flag it off by showing you just a few bits of data. Yeah, so this is PM 2.5 in Delhi in April 2019 and April 2020. So not only do we see a 30% reduction in PM 2.5, we also see the sources, the reduction by sources. You can see that the residential PM 2.5 emissions didn't come down significantly, but industrial did. The power sector did a little bit. Transport sector, quite a bit. Road dust, because unlike coastal cities such as Metro Manila, Delhi is an inland city which is naturally dusty also. So road dust, which gets far worse with transport, that came down a lot. That was not really the big season for agricultural burning. It's now. We just got over that. And overall, the 30% decrease due to the lockdown. And as we know, as we have all been pointing out, this was not sustainable and it was not sustained. Come October, these were the headlines. Right from the beginning of October, these were the headlines that we started seeing. These were the headlines we started seeing. And today, this is the air quality map. This is this morning's air quality map of India. And you see that the ambient air quality is in the red in very large parts of the country. Definitely almost all over northern India, large parts of central and western India. So the city in which I live, the capital of India, is definitely very much in the red. The city where Dr. Salvi lives is also in the red. The city where Dr. Sridhar lives being a coastal city, is fortunately not in the red. But there is far too much of this red. Now, what I'm going to do now is not to talk anymore about air pollution, about COPD, about other forms of lung disease caused by air pollution, and the connection between these and COVID. Because I'm aware that this audience knows a lot, and I'm also very much aware that after the presentation given by Dr. Salvi, which by the way scared me a lot, and the detailed presentation by Christine, which was excellent, I don't think there is adding more and more bits of information is not going to help. I think what we need to do now is to actually discuss that what we as journalists can do beyond what we are doing now. As all of you know, we are doing stories. Those stories are being published, those stories are being broadcast, those stories are being uploaded onto websites. Is it having the effect that we want? I'm afraid the answer has to be no. So it's not that we are having zero effect, but I think it's fairly clear now that our stories are not having the effect that we would like them to have. Given that, what more can we do? I'm just going to throw out a couple of possibilities here and then take this back to the moderator so that we can have a discussion. One possibility is that we have been doing too many doom and gloom stories. Have we? Have we scared our audiences too much to the point where they become numbed and start thinking, oh my God, there's no point in thinking about this? Is that something that we should think about as journalists? Or have we also triggered some responses that we wouldn't want to trigger, such as defiance, by people saying, oh, everybody else is driving an SUV, why can't I? And if enough people say that, then we get into more and more trouble. Or have we, and by the way, this is quite often the way adolescents start smoking. It's peer pressure, very often. And the same thing applies when it comes to transport. The same thing seems to be applying, unfortunately, when it comes to agricultural stubble burning. So is there defiance from at least certain sections of our audiences? Would solutions may make our work more effective? Should we concentrate more on the possible solutions and the economic benefits, the health benefits, the family benefits of doing more stories on solutions rather than doing more stories on the problem? What I'm going to do is to throw this open to all of you and hand it back to the moderators. Thank you.
Thanks, Joydeep. That was fabulous, and I think you really set the ball rolling. I'm just going to, before continuing with the discussion on what journalists can really do in order to address the range of issues that these presentations have thrown up, I'm going to quickly ask Sunny to take up the couple of questions that are there in the chat box. Sunny, would you like to do that?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Jaya. I think we can start the ball rolling with what Joydeep and Christine, a follow-up from their presentation and what Joydeep too flagged on, contributions and on how we can report on the solutions rather than, we journalists like to write doom and gloom stories without offering any solutions at all. But one question to set the ball rolling, this is from Monica Ban. Is there any solution for crop burning that we can suggest and advocate for? What about composting the crop residue? We are really like seeing this is a perennial problem in my part of the world and also Christine's part of the world, where we see seasonal burning. You have seasonal burning in Indonesia, which affects Singapore and Malaysia, and also affects certain parts of Borneo, where and also burning in Kalimantan affects the southern Philippines and Mindanao. So is there anything, is there a solution in sight? Okay, both to Joydeep and also to Christine. Yeah, thank you. Joydeep, I think, yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Yes, there are solutions. There are known solutions, technically proven solutions to crop burning, and yes, you can turn them into manure, and they make very good fertilizer through a digester. There are other solutions like simply plowing them into the ground. None of these solutions seem to be working at scale. They are all working very well as pilot projects, but the trouble with crop residue burning, is that why is crop residue being burnt? The crop residue is being burnt because farmers need to clear their fields within a period of 15 days before they plant the next crop. And the solutions being proposed simply cannot find another way of clearing thousands and thousands of hectares within those 15 days. That is why it's failing. There are solutions, and right now in the villages around Delhi, which fall within the state of Delhi, the solutions are working. But then Delhi is what, 93% urban? So it's only those 7% rural part of Delhi that we're talking about. The major crop burning parts of South Asia, which are along the India-Pakistan border in Punjab and adjoining parts of both India and Pakistan, there it's on right now, or just about finished. They just completed the last cycle of burning crops, and it was terrible. While it was, every morning you woke up thinking that that somebody in the neighborhood is burning leaves. That's what it smelled like every morning you opened your bedroom door, and it was terrible. Yes, there are solutions, and the problem is not the lack of technical feasibility. The problem is managerial and of governance. How do we get these solutions working on the ground in a very limited period of time?
Christine, on to you. Can you talk a bit on this burning in plantations? Or palm oil oil palm plantations?
I totally agree with Joydeep mentioning the need to do it large scale. So, for example, in the Philippines, it's also a cultural thing. And not just in agricultural lands, but also like in rural areas, in households, they burn usually the trash or from the trees. It's what our elders got used to. Even if they don't have to, they can just simply put the discarded leaves in the trash. But until now, there are still instances of that which contribute somehow to air pollution. I think maybe the solution that we should be looking for is something that could also be income generating for the farmers, because crop burning is economical. They don't have to spend that much on it, and it's less labor intensive than other means. So there has to be some sort of incentive for the farmers to appropriately dispose of. I think there have been some research on using straw for bioethanol or power production. So it's something that the government really has to support research on that, and pilot projects if this can be found to be an effective way of addressing this. And of course, the additional income for the farmers would be a big incentive for them, especially in our country. Our agriculture is very backward still. There are a lot of really good initiatives by NGOs, cooperatives, but it's not. It has yet to trickle down to the majority of the farmers. So that's something that the government really has to push for.
Thank you, Christine. Now we'll go over to Dr. Salvi. He's got 3 questions here. We'll take we'll go question by question. This is from Dr. Nagaratnam, and Dr. Naga wants to know. I'll read this question out to you. In the view of COPD, do masks which protect us from COVID-19, will they have any lung issues over a long-term use?
A good question, a very good question. So I did allude during my presentation that patients who suffer with COPD should be wearing a mask, not only to protect themselves, but to prevent the spread of infection in case they're an asymptomatic carrier. Now, an N95 mask is a strict no-no for the COPD patient for a simple reason. The COPD patient is already compromised with his lung function status. His lungs are damaged. He's finding it difficult to breathe. And on top of that, you're making him wear a tight N95 mask, which is going to increase the resistance for him to breathe in air easily. Now, that is the reason why research studies have clearly indicated that N95, when COPD patients wear it, they go into respiratory failure faster, and they are intolerant to even wearing that mask. So it should not be given to them. An N95 mask is not a good choice for patients of COPD. A simple, as I said, a simple surgical mask or a cloth mask is good enough to protect themselves as well as to protect others from catching the infection.
Thank you, Dr. Salvi. We've got 2 questions here from Dana Lakshmi. Since we are on the issue of masks, her first question is, can asthmatics use N95 masks?
So if you have mild asthma, you try the N95 mask. If you're comfortable, by all means, you can wear it. But I can tell you through experience that even if you have mild asthma, the N95 mask can be a real difficult one because it makes your breathing a lot more difficult. So whether it is COPD or whether it is asthma, or for that matter, any underlying lung disease, an N95 mask is perhaps not a good choice. A surgical mask or a cloth mask is more than enough. I think the N95 mask has received a lot more attention than what it actually deserves. It's good for a healthcare provider, especially people working in the hospitals, nurses or other staff, paramedical staff. But for a lay person and for a patient, I think a simple surgical mask or a cloth mask is more than enough in terms of both offering protection as well as the risk of transmitting the infection. So even asthmatics should, as far as possible, avoid it.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Salvi. This is Dana Lakshmi's second question. Can't the relevant vaccines be made mandatory for COPD and relevant and related patients, enabling pulmonologists to administer them?
Ideally, yes, they should be made mandatory. The problem is many doctors are not aware about it. Neither is there any any government resolution that says that all doctors must provide vaccination to people with chronic lung diseases. So I think we need to educate the health, the policymakers, the people at the government level, so that they can issue such advisories. Doctors need to be educated. Not many doctors are even aware about the importance of vaccination for COPD, or for that matter, other chronic lung diseases. Doctors are not aware. So we need to create that awareness. And then the last step would be to make it mandatory, and like how Japan did it. I think we somehow we should enter into that kind of making it mandatory, so that the right treatment is given to the patients. Vaccination reduces the risk of developing recurrent infections and exacerbations in patients of COPD, and that's a very, very big advantage that these vaccines provide.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salvi. I'll now pass it over to Dr. Jaya, and I believe that we've got a leading environmental activist in our audience. So on to you, Dr. Jaya, to introduce Nityanandan. Thank you.
I'm so pleased to welcome my colleague and teacher at the Asian College of Journalism, Mr. Nityanand Jayaraman, who's written extensively on pollution and a range of other environmental and health intersections in the press. And he also is an active presence on social media. So Niti, so glad you could join us. I'm absolutely excited to see you here. And this webinar is going out to the Asian region, and we're really trying to think about the interconnectedness of this whole thing and how we need better cooperation and exchange of information among journalists in the region, so we can come out with more sort of intersectional stories. So we're so pleased that Dr. Salvi is also here. He's among the leading pulmonologists in the world, and I think you probably just missed his presentation, but Dr. Salvi, pleased to introduce you to Niti as well. And I hand it over to you, Niti.
Thank you very much. And I did catch a little bit of Christine's presentation and Joydeep's. I'm sorry to have missed Dr. Salvi's presentation. I'm from the same city as Jaya. I'm from Chennai in Tamil Nadu. And just a couple of things that I would like to flag is that what we're talking about in terms of air pollution and air quality levels, even when we celebrate, say, in Chennai, being a coastal city, has healthy air, or what we consider healthy air is moderately polluted. Lots of places are victims of averages. The city of Chennai has 3 regulatory grade monitors that are online, and that is for a city the size of about 458 square kilometers. Within the city of Chennai, I'm just returning this morning. I went at 6 o'clock to a place called Manali, which is in North Chennai, a very densely populated, highly industrialized area, which has only 1 monitor. And this area, what was very interesting is the day I was there was a day that the National Green Tribunal issued a ban on the use of firecrackers on Diwali Day in cities that had poor air quality. Chennai apparently does not have poor air quality. But the people, I was on a small toxic tour with children leading the tour. And the children said in Manali, it is Diwali every day. And the air quality is very poor. So just in terms of the issue that was flagged by Joydeep, in terms of what can journalists do, I think what is not being done enough is to highlight the fact that there are victims of averages and to visibilize these victims. And these victims are usually also victims of other kinds of social oppression, including spatial discrimination. In India, it is on the basis of caste. In other countries, it might be on the basis of class or other criteria. So that is one thing that I would like to highlight, is that oftentimes the problems and the solutions affect certain communities more than others. And that is the reason why I'm extremely apprehensive of journalists focusing on solutions, because I feel that there are more solution impacted communities than there are problem impacted communities. I just throw it out there as a provocation. And one last comment on the solution, again taking on this, is this entire there's a global cheerleading group for renewable energy, and I find that extremely scary, because I find that the renewable is it has got this kind of a green tinge, and green is a monochrome. It's a single color that is used to try and denote the complexity of environmental social interactions. And oftentimes, renewable technologies also tend to victimize the same communities that had been victimized by non-renewable fossil fuel kind of technologies. And so the question that we also need to be asking is a very far more difficult question. And I'm sorry that it is not very easy to provide alternatives or positive stories on that. But the question that needs to be asked is, can we really expect to run an inherently unsustainable and exploitative world with clean energy? Thank you.
Joydeep, any last words?
No last words, obviously, in this, and nor do I disagree with Niti at all. I agree with him that there are differential impacts of whether it's air pollution, water pollution, any form of pollution, whether it's natural pollution, social pollution, economic pollution, caste pollution. Obviously, the impacts are totally different. And that it is part of our job as journalists to point that out, definitely. The point I was trying to make is that we have been doing this to the best of our abilities. We may not have done this enough, not enough of us may have been doing this. What we are finding increasingly is a sort of fatigue, reader fatigue, audience fatigue with this. So that's the question I wanted to throw out to all of us participating here. How do we deal with fatigue? Is talking about turning straw into manure rather than putting it on fire, is that something that will reduce the fatigue to some extent? It may not. We know very well, at least that is what most of us are finding now, that writing against SUVs with lots of private transport polluting the air in cities is not really getting us anywhere. It's not reducing the number of SUVs being sold by any means. It's not putting any control on that. So what is the way we can sort of bring people to understand that we are on a totally unsustainable path if we continue to push private transport? So that is the question. These are the questions that I wish to throw out to the participants.
Thank you very much. Jaya.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Dr. Salvi, from the viewpoint of the health sector or from the viewpoint of a pulmonologist, what kinds of stories do you think journalists should really be doing? Where do you really want the push to go to? I mean, what kinds of stories should we be doing that are flagging up, or what kind of tone should the discussions strike, do you think?
So I gave an example in my presentation where the level of awareness of COPD in our country is so minuscule, despite the fact that it is the second leading cause of death and the second leading cause of suffering. Now, if this disease is at such a big scale and less than 1% of the population is even aware about it, I think there's a lot that the journalists can do in this field. Is just to spread the level of awareness that there is something called COPD, which is a chronic lung disease, which is preventable. It is preventable if we know what the risk factors are. And I think that's where the message should go, that it should not necessarily be a message to scare people, but it should be a message to tell people that you can protect yourself from having this disease if you do not, if you're aware that this causes COPD. So I think those kind of stories are more important rather than just creating awareness. In my earlier years of my research, I used to take a lot of pride in saying that, oh, I have taught so many people about the harmful effects of these pollutant. But I think that is not a solution. I think, for example, the use of a mosquito coil. I have been talking a lot about it for the last 10, 15 years, that one mosquito coil produces as much amount of smoke that is equal to smoking 100 cigarettes. Now, whilst that is true, there is no alternative to that. I think that is a problem. So if you're going to scare people about the use of a mosquito coil and not give them a solution, I think that is a problem. I think that's where we seriously lack our energies, and there has to be a serious amount of investment by the government to identify solutions. It is only then that these level of awareness drives can have a positive impact. Otherwise, as Mr. Joydeep said, we're just creating more fatigue. We are just bombarding them with messages with no clear solution in hand. And I think that is not giving us the path that a solution path that we are looking forward to.
I mean, here I just wanted to sort of ask Nityanand about, but you said the journalists should sort of not bang on about solutions per se. Could you explain that a little bit more? Because it seems at variance with what Dr. Salvi is saying.
I don't know. I don't think I'm at variance. It might have come across initially as that, including what Joydeep had mentioned. Yes, what he says about fatigue is definitely there. What I'm saying is, I think that the solutions on a very specific thing like a mosquito coil are easier. But when we're talking about the problems of air pollution, say in the city of Chennai, where there are multiple sources of pollution, which source we go after is actually a political choice. I would not choose to go after the thermal power station, or the government will not choose to go after a thermal power station. I can offer you alternatives. The second is what we call alternatives and what we call solutions is something that journalists need to be far more careful about putting out. For instance, beach cleaning in my city is considered to be a solution. I find it to be a racist, casteist act. You're moving garbage from one place to another, and the garbage moves from a place of high value where highly valued people live to a place of low value where people with very low social value live. That is not a solution. So I'm saying that when it comes to exploring solutions, then I think the journalists have to pay a lot of attention. And I don't see that enough in the mainstream. The people who write for the third pole are people who are already sensitive to these issues. And I think that other journalists, I think that what we have as a responsibility is to ensure that the journalists in the mainstream newspapers who are gunning for one story today, another tomorrow, those people need to be educated on being very careful about pushing out solutions, because often the people who push out solutions have a lot of money to make out of it. So I think that particular thing needs to be looked at. I mean, even if it is the issue of vaccines for COVID, I find that there is there is an economic interest behind it, which makes me suspicious. And I think that the journalists need to give us more clarity on that, and medical professionals need to give us more clarity on that to ensure that when they are speaking, they are not being controlled by hidden strings. There is a trust deficit, and I come from that trust deficit. And so all I'm saying is that not being trusting is a very healthy thing for a journalist. So we need to be able to question and bring out the things that might really have potential uses to. Thank you.
Christine, any words from you?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Natyanand and Joydeep said about solutions, and at the same time being aware, because I've worked with mainstream media throughout my whole career as a journalist, and it's really the structure of mainstream media that makes us that gives us these limitations in the types of stories that we're able to pursue. Like it's just my preference for environmental reporting that really brought me here, but my editors would have probably wanted me to pursue more political stories at the same time. But it's, I guess, at one point we should also be educating our fellow journalists, making them more aware. I mean, it's through fellowships by organizations that I was able to become um, entrenched in climate reporting, for example. And it's if other journalists are not exposed to that kind of issues and realizing what really matters. At the end of the day, I just after a couple of years of political reporting, I was thinking, he said, she said stories really do not have an impact on our society. I really should be focusing on climate change reporting or health reporting. So it really is a big question for journalists to realize why we're doing this certain types of story. And I agree, it's the beauty of journalism sometimes is just working on a story and then the next day you just forget about it and you move on. But it really shouldn't be like that. We really should be following and looking for, being more enterprising as a journalist. And for me, with solutions, I always look at the story as a good balance of scaring the bejesus out of people at the same time offering them the different solutions that are there. So, like if you do long form reporting, I think it's essential that you always present solutions, but at a way that it's not like this is just an inspiring story. There are other factors to weigh here and other problems that solutions can probably bring about. So it's more nuanced reporting that we really need right now. And we're sick of course, we're sick of just talking about, we know that this is a problem, but what are the other aspects of the problem we're not aware of and how can we address this? And I think solution focused stories are also helpful because there are a lot of good ideas out there. It's just that they're not being highlighted by the government. And it's the role of journalists to really shed light on those, especially the community-based solutions coming from the people. So that's a really big motivator, should be a motivator for us journalists.
Thanks, Christina. Very quickly, I think Imelda is going to say a few words about more in the vein of solutions-oriented journalism. So I'm going to ask Imelda to quickly step in before we...
Yeah, thanks, Jaya. I think when done well, the stories provide valuable insights about how communities may more effectively tackle serious problems. And we know from experience that solution stories engage people differently, no? And they can change the tone of public discourse as well. And by revealing what has worked, they can also lead to meaningful change. And that's the essence of what we're trying to do here. It's not about making people feel good or advocating for a certain policy or balancing out the doom and gloom. Instead, solutions journalism is about what journalism has always been about. What's that? Informing and empowering people. So we're at Internews or Journalism Network, where we're also asking journalists to do that in a more complete way by investigating what has worked just as rigorously and relentlessly as what hasn't.
Thanks so much, Imelda. And now I'm just going to hand it back to Sunny. But before that, I'll have my little 1 minute to share on behalf of everyone here. A huge thanks to Dr. Sundeep Salvi for giving so generously of his time and also for listening to all the media perspectives so that you also will have a sort of a better understanding of the challenges and the opportunities that we have on a day-to-day basis. I'd also like to thank Christine for that excellent presentation and Joydeep for those insightful remarks, and Nityanand, who's also been generous with his thinking, and Imelda, and all the participants who participated actively here with their questions. And I hope we can keep this conversation going over a period of time. But now I'm going to hand it back to Sunny.
Thank you, Dr. Jaya. On behalf of Internews Rooted in Trust project funded by USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, I want to thank our eminent panel speakers, Dr. Sundeep Salvi, Christine Sabilo, and Joydeep Gupta, who's also our colleague in Internews. And also thank you, Dr. Jaya, and for graciously moderating this webinar and taking time off from a very busy teaching schedule. And also my colleague in EJN, Amy Sim, who also paved this way, paved the way for this webinar to happen. And thank you, Imelda, for helping out. And till we meet again, thank you very much. I'll be sending to all the attendees. I'll be sending out the evaluation form. So please take 5 minutes to fill it up. And I think Dr. Salvi too has got some has authored some tip sheets which he will share with Dr. Jaya, and we'll put it. We'll make it available to all the participants here. So thank you very much, and thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar. Till we meet again, thank you very much. Bye. God bless.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to the two great moderators, Jaya and Sunny.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everybody.
Joydev. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.